Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Antonia Aquilante. Antonia has been making up stories for as long as she can remember, and at the age of 12, decided she would be a writer when she grew up. After many years and a few career detours, she has returned to that original plan. Her stories have changed over the years, but one thing has remained consistent. They all end in happily ever after. Antonia has a fondness for travel and a long list of places she wants to visit and revisit, taking photos, family history, fabulous shoes, baking treats that she shares with friends and family, and of course, reading. She usually has at least two books started at once and never goes anywhere without her Kindle. Though she is a convert to ebooks, she still loves paper books the best. And there are a couple of thousand of them residing in her home with her. Antonia was born and raised in New Jersey. She is living there again after years in Washington, D.C., North Carolina for school and work. She enjoys being back in the Garden State, but admits to being tempted every so often to run away from home and live in Italy. Welcome, Antonia. Please tell us a little more about yourself and your new novel, To Love the Dragon King.
Hi, thank you for having me. Um, hmm, about myself. Yeah, I don't know, kind of boring. But yeah, like I said, I've been writing forever. Uh I To Love the Dragon King is my 11th published book. Um it's Yeah, I don't know, I've written more than that, but that's what's been published. Yeah, and I've always kind of had, yeah, that fondness for writing and writing romance stories, writing fantasy stories. Um, yeah, To Love the Dragon King starts a new series, Dragons of Ivrea. It's the story of a king who finds out that kind of discovers this conspiracy, this plot against him, against the kingdom, that puts kind of everyone in danger, and has set out with the few people he knows absolutely he can trust to try to find all the conspirators and bring them to justice and kind of save um, the people of his kingdom from mostly these kind of nobility who want something quite different from what he does for his people. So he, in the process of doing this, goes probably against the advice of a lot of people who want to keep him safe, goes himself to interrogate one of the conspirators they have are capturing, and finds Sasha there. Sasha is a young man who has been told basically by his family that his only worth to them is to make the best match possible, whether as a husband or as a concubine, which is a contracted thing in this world. So that's what he has become to this man. Only he doesn't realize that there is this conspiracy plot. He doesn't realize that his parents are involved in it and that they are basically using him as a pawn in this. He finds all of this out as, you know, the king shows up with all these soldiers, and lots of stuff happens. So he finds all this out. The king finds him there. There's obviously attraction between them, though neither of them is really like, is this a good idea? Because, you know, the king isn't sure if he can trust Sasha since he seems to be involved in this. Sasha has been betrayed by his parents, who he thought he could trust. So he isn't sure if he, you know, can trust what's happening, if he can even trust himself. He's really been taught for a long time that he doesn't have a lot to offer. So while they're falling in love, while they're also dealing with this conspiracy, they're also sort of learning to trust each other and themselves. So that's kind of what it's about. And, you know, magic and dragon shifters and all that fun stuff.
Okay, dragon shifters. Those are great. Um, you've kind of told us a little bit about the story. It is part of a series, The Dragons of Ivrea. How many books do you plan for the series?
I'm planning 3. To Love the Dragon King is the first. So the plan was always 3. It's each one will be a kind of discrete romance, one couple in each book, following kind of people in the king's family, I guess. Well, each one will have their own romance. There may be a fourth now. There's another character who may want a book, as often happens. We'll see. This series is actually set in the same universe as one of my other series, The Chronicles of Tornai. So I haven't quite decided yet whether this character will get their book in this series as the unexpected fourth book, or if it'll tie into that one. We'll see how it goes once I get there. But that's kind of the plan for this.
Okay. So, your books, are fall into the category, which I guess is now being called romantasy. It's very popular out there in the TikTok world for sure. But is this one? Would you say this is your favorite genre to read, and why?
Um, yeah, I both probably. I do read pretty widely. I mean, within romance, without like outside of romance. So I read all sorts of romance, but this is probably my favorite. It's always been my favorite to write as well, long before it apparently is now called romantasy. And before it was really popular, or maybe it was always popular with readers, but I don't know, publishers kind of didn't seem to know what to do with it 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, I love it. I love that you can have these big sweeping fantasy worlds. You can have the magic and the dragons or whatever other creatures, whatever the author can come up with. And you can have either these huge plots where there's the quest to save the kingdom, or the smaller, cozier plots of, like just the little magical things, those tiny, cozy, lower stakes things. You could have all of that. Plus, you can have the romance, you can have the happily ever after. And I've always loved that. I mean, from the time, you know, I was a kid, I feel like it was middle school, I started reading both adult romance and adult sci-fi fantasy. And my biggest complaint with fantasy stories was so often there would just be no happily ever, like people would just die, or like there was no romance, or the romance would end poorly, or someone would die at the end and it would be tragic, and I would just hate it. So yeah, I love fantasy romance. You can bring the two things together.
Um, I like fantasy romance too. It's probably the genre that I didn't know existed until I started to stumble across. But um, it encompasses so much. Like personally, like as you were talking, I started to think back to like um, even with the paranormal romance. That's a form of fantasy. Like it's and even some urban fiction, some urban fantasy, like same thing, because there's always a love interest, there's always like the protagonist, and then they have a love interest, and then you're always rooting for the love interest, so there's always been that blend. Yet now, now we've switched the title to romantasy because I think it actually encompasses a lot more. Paranormal always made people go, no, not for me. But I think now when you start with the romance part and then you add the fantasy, it's opening the door to like a lot more interest. And I think it was in the YA for a long time. So it's just crossing over. And I think that's because that generation is grown up now and looking for the same blend. My opinion as a librarian. Only my opinion.
No, it makes total sense to me. Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned your other series. Mentioned what was it
Oh,
again?
Chronicles of Tornai. Yeah.
That's fine. So, what piece of your work, either from that series or this new series, are you most proud of?
Um, It's always a little, well, okay. It's sometimes I always feel, well, this at least isn't like some people ask me which of my books is my favorite, and I feel like I'm, choosing between children because, but this is a little different. I guess most proud of either this current book, To Love the Dragon King, or the one that came right before it, the one I published right before it, The Envoy's Honor, which is the latest book in that Chronicles of Tournai series. Um, the Envoy's Honor mostly because of just the way, like I thought my writing had gotten to, like I don't know. I always feel weird saying, oh, my writing was really good here because, we all say like we all hate, feel a little weird doing that, but kind of I liked the way I put the plot together, and that I liked that I kind of pushed myself into places I didn't always go. The love story there, the romance is like an adversaries to lovers. It's not really enemies to lovers. I haven't gone there yet, but it's definitely an adversaries to lovers. Plus there's a kind of murder mystery element, and the two um the love interests have to, they kind of know that they didn't do it because they have all this friction between them, but they know they didn't do it because they were arguing slash kissing at the time. So they have to go back and kind of figure out, okay, well, what really happened here? So I really enjoy how a lot of things came together in that. And if you do read it, since the two books take place in the same universe, there are a couple of characters that do kind of cross over. They don't have to both be read to understand the other, but you'll meet some familiar faces, let's say. And then To Love the Dragon King, again, I mean, partly it's, yeah, I think my writing matures and gets better the more I practice with every book. But also because this is a book I started just at the beginning of 2020. I started writing, and the pandemic hit, and my brain decided it didn't want to write, and I was pushing through to finish this book. And there were times I really didn't think I would ever finish it. And it took me like 3 years to write, which is not my normal for writing a book. So yeah, it was some of that. Plus, it's my first self-published book. So I've been kind of proud that I figured that out and, did a lot of that myself, formatted it myself, got it together. So yeah, I guess.
Okay. Um, what are you currently working on?
So right now, I'm working on the second book in this dragon series. It's tentatively titled To Trust a Dragon Spy, but I'm not sure that's gonna stick. Titles are tough. But it's, yeah, second book in the series, so it'll continue try to wrap up some of the loose end conspiracy plot points from the first one, though I don't write cliffhangers. So the first one wraps up in a good place, plus give us a new romance. So I'm working on that, concentrating on that most. I'm also playing around with the first book and something a little different, still romantasy, but kind of a contemporary cozy witchy series. So that's something I'm also kind of working on in the background too.
Okay. Um, do you hear from your readers, and like what kind of things do they say?
Sometimes, yeah, just, and it's always lovely to hear from them. Like I'm so happy when I do. It's nice to kind of, hear that people are excited, or hear, um like what they're thinking. So yeah, I sometimes get, little things about books. Somebody telling me once, I still laugh, that they didn't think I could, the character in the first book of my Tordai series, there was a supporting character, and they're like, he's so horrible, he's terrible. Like, and then he's the main character in the second book, and then came back and was like, I didn't think you could redeem him, but you did. And so that always makes me happy when, somebody is telling me that, something worked. I've what always gets me is people telling me that these are books they've, read over and over. They've become comfort reads, and I just I melt a little at that because I mean I have my favorite comfort reads too, and I sometimes can't believe that I could be that for someone, but that's I love it. That's what I want. So
That's a great thing to hear from the readers. Um, so we've covered a little bit of your series and the stories. Um, and I think in your bio, I mentioned a little of how you got started writing. Can you tell us what inspired you to start writing?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've always, yeah, like my bio says, I've always written, or at least I've always made up stories. I mean, I was the kid who's like Barbies had, super complicated soap opera like lives and, relationships and interactions. There was always something. I so it was always that. It was always like playing make believe, playing dress up, making up stories, just everything. And then yeah, I started writing them down. And I mean it helped, I had, you'd write a short story in school and teachers would like it. Like, okay, cool. Like this is fun. I can do this. Yeah, I think I was about 12. There was a creative writing class for, a semester, I think in middle school. And I took it, it was fun, and I was like, I really like I wanna do this, like, this is what I want my life to be, and obviously, things took some twists and turns. I didn't, end up immediately doing that, but I always kind of kept writing, and yeah, I finally decided I needed to try, I guess, many years later, and, I don't know, I was in a bad I used to practice law, um, and it was kind of just an incredibly stressful profession, an incredibly stressful time in it, and I was like, I need something I enjoy, so I'd steal little moments, and I'd go in and really I'm like, "I'm gonna write this, I'm gonna write this book, and I'm gonna really try this time," and yeah, that's what I did. I mean, that was not the first book I published, but that was the first book I tried with. So,
Um, this is a question I don't know if authors like me, like when I ask it, but how would you describe your author voice?
it is a tough question. I mean, it's weird because it's one of those things that, they tell us, we're supposed to develop our voice, but it's yeah, one of those weird things to try to describe on your own. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I think about it as voice or as I think about it so much as kind of this type of book I read more than obviously, or type of book I write. Um, Obviously romantasy is kind of the genre, but within it, I tend to write very kind of, I mean, emotional, swoony romances, but kind of on the lower angst side of the scale. I tend to be someone who writes if not outright cozy things, because apparently that's a thing now. Cozy fantasy and cozy romantasy. That's delightful. I didn't know it was a thing, but that's a term I have heard recently, so I love it. Some of my books definitely kind of fit into that sort of lower stakes fantasy romance kind of thing. Some don't. Some have kind of a little um, higher stakes, maybe less than angst between kind of our partners. But yeah, sort of that. So kind of cozier, kind of like I said, I like the idea of something that kind of can sweep you away, give you some comfort in that sort of descriptive, lyrical world building kind of aspect. I don't know, that might have made no sense, but I feel like we're all kind of tough. We all have issues with that
It's a
question.
tough question. It's a very tough question. Um, I mean, you're doing a great job at trying to like define it. So thank you for that. Um, but you're right. Author voice is something that is on the page, but trying to explain it. It's a different thing. um, so what in your life do you consider was a major influence in your writing? You mentioned soap operas, so I have to ask, did you used to watch soap operas like your early days with the with your dolls? What was like a soap opera?
Yeah, I did. Like my mom and my grandmother always watched like the ABC soaps, like um All My Children, One Life to Live. I think General Hospital is the only one that's still on the air. Um, but yeah, they always watched, so I watched them like from the time I was a little kid. Like it was you were there, they were on TV, like sitting there with, playing so yeah, like I I I probably soaked up a lot of soap opera influence from a very young age. Um, so there's that. Yeah. And I mean, just books and stories forever. I mean, my mom's a huge reader. So, she always had a book in her hand. I always had books. So yeah, between, the visual of, soap operas and, you know, even all the Disney movies, the princesses and the magic and the sweeping happily ever after kind of stuff that I always loved as a little kid. Um, yeah, just kind of that evolution. I mean, my mom was, I was 12. She handed me my first romance. I had nothing to read. I feel like YA at that point was maybe not what it is now. So yeah, I started reading adult romance pretty early, and the first one was, Nora Roberts, and I just kept on with that. So yeah, I think from that early age, there's been a lot of that influence in my life.
And Nora Roberts definitely tilts into the fantasy also with a lot of the witch trilogies that she's done. So definitely a source there for inspiration. Um, so for you, what is the most difficult part of writing?
Can I say the actual writing?
Okay.
Sometimes I Sometimes well, there are days, so I joke that I'm waiting for like, the elves to come in the night and like finish the book. But I guess they only help like shoemakers, maybe. I don't know. Um, that's maybe, I don't know. That's sort of the not serious answer. But I guess the part of it for me is the harder part is always kind of that first I don't know. First draft, I don't always think of them as drafts. I know a lot of people do, but I write in sort of a weird way. I don't outline. So I figure a lot out as I go along. So that's probably the hardest part for me. Once I have most of that on the page and I can kind of go back and revise and fill in the gaps I need to and make the things consistent that maybe weren't because I was figuring things out as I went along, that's where things get a lot easier, a lot smoother for me. So yeah, that first pass through of really just getting those words on the page and getting to know my characters and figuring stuff out as I go along is, I think, the hardest part in my process.
Okay. Um, and you mentioned earlier that is that the current book, the most recent book, it took about 3 years to write, but that's not your average. How long on average does it take you to write a book?
Yeah, other than the newest, which took forever, I could usually write a book in maybe 6 or 7 months, which was, yeah, hopefully I'll get back on track with that. But yeah, that was always my sort of my average. So yeah, I used to be able to write close to 2 books a year. Well, fingers crossed, get back there.
And do you have a writing routine?
Um, Not really. Yeah, I don't know. Everything I used to, I guess. It's harder to sort of my day job schedule is a little weird. You know, um, I'm a tutor and plus I do some copy editing, proofreading. So my life is kind of all over. Like days don't always look the same. So it's harder to say, okay, these are my hours when I'm absolutely going to write. So sometimes it's, yeah, kind of fitting things in where they go, where I can. Unfortunately, I really kind of want a routine. I feel like it would make my life a little bit easier. I sort of envy the people who are like, these are my hours to write. So hopefully I can get there, get back there. But yeah, a little chaotic right now.
Okay. Um, you also mentioned earlier that this was your first self-published book. Um, so I have to ask. I'm assuming that you were published with a publisher. Um, how long after you completed your first manuscript was it before you got the call, like from a publisher that they wanted to publish your book?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, my first 10 books were with a small press. This newest was self-published, mostly because I just, more control, more, just if I'm going to be doing lots of promo and lots of things anyway, might as well have a lot more control over everything, which was kind of an experiment. It's gone well though, so we'll see. But yeah, let's see, my first completed novel, I had written a lot of kind of short stories and novellas before that, but my first completed novel, I wrote it back in, gosh, I think I finished it in 2011. It was not my first published book. In fact, it is still sitting. In fact, my first three books were not published. I wrote them as a trilogy. They were a fantasy romance. Back in that time, every agent or editor I talked to was like, oh, we don't really know there isn't fantasy romance isn't popular. We don't really know what to do with this. So it was kind of tough. Plus, I mean, I'm not going to say they were fantastic first novels. You learn as you go. But my fourth book, I my fourth book was the one that was finally published. And I got that call in January 2015. So yep, that was it. And then it came out later that year. Yeah.
And so I have a question about, you mentioned that there are some overlapping characters between the first series and this new series. How does that work with your new series being self-published and the previous series having been published by a small press? Um, do you have the ability to um, write between the two series, like going forward? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Thankfully, I do. I think it really depends on the publisher and the contract. Mine is pretty good in that way. Like I'm not really locked in to publishing only those characters with only that press. I'm not sort of locked into kind of even, continuing that series with them if I didn't have to. Thankfully, it's a decent contract. A lot of them are different. There's um, exclusivity clauses and rights of first refusal and all sorts of stuff. But this small press was pretty good about that. Um, right now, it's the characters that kind of it's a couple of just kind of supporting characters in this newest book. One was a supporting character in the previous one in the other series. One was actually one of the main characters who just popped over for a visit. um, so we'll see how it goes. I don't know how much kind of crossover there'll be in the future. They're set in the same universe. They're set in very different places. So I can kind of go on and write separately if I want, or I can play around with some characters if, they kind of decide they want to come by. It's so bad because, like I said, I am not a planner. Um, so sometimes characters show up. The characters that did kind of show up in this first book, I didn't even think, like when I first started, I was like, okay, this is set in the same world and, maybe I'll mention some things, but I didn't expect them to be kind of real supporting characters in this. I thought they were kind of gonna make little appearances and move on, but turned out to play a little bit more of a role than I thought. So, but it's fun when discovering those things, and hopefully it's fun for the readers who get to kind of revisit with characters.
I'm sure it's gonna be fun. If you follow series, you just love to revisit the characters. So I'm sure. um, what was one of the most surprising things that you learned in publishing your books or self-publishing your books?
Um, I think, well, just in publishing in general, I think how much kind of luck is involved and kind of timing, maybe. I obviously you need to work hard, obviously need to learn and write the best book you can and put out the best product. But there's just so much you know, about just, well, is this the right time for fantasy romance? Like so many people are saying like, oh, we don't know what to do with this. And then a few years later, suddenly everybody loves it. Or, so many authors talk about, you go to these workshops or whatever, and people talk about, oh, or even just among themselves, talking about marketing or talking about, how they put out their audiobooks or translations or whatever, and how so many things hit big. And then you listen to how they did it and you're like, "Oh, yeah, but that's just the confluence of some weird situation that you happen to be in." So yeah, it's a strange world, where, yeah, it could just be right place, right time. It could be kind of there's so much more of an element of that than I, knew would be there. Self-publishing, yeah, I mean, it was something I never intended to do. When I really started, I had planned the traditional route. I was, looking for an agent, I was looking for a publisher, whether it be a big one or small press. I just didn't think that was something like there's so much involved with it. The business aspects, not just the writing aspects, and the marketing, and I just everything. And that was not something I thought I really wanted to do. But yeah, as I kind of went along in my career, I things changed. I guess I evolved and realized, yeah, this is something I can do, hopefully. So yeah, I'm sure I'm still learning a ton about it. But yeah, I'm I like it so far. So we'll at the very least, this series will be self-published.
Very important that you like it. Um, so you are a member of the New Jersey Romance Writers. How important was it to join a writers group? And do you have critique partners? Are they important for you in terms of like your writing and that community aspect?
I don't currently have critique partners. I do have a couple of people who will read my draft once it's put together, and because, like I said, I write in a very strange, like, I don't actually write in order. I don't. I just kind of, yeah, start at the beginning. There are usually gaps. I have to fill them in because I'm figuring out things as I go along. It's chaotic, but I've never been able to write it any other way. I wish I could. But yeah, so I don't have critique partners. I do have a couple of people who will read once I'm finished. I mean, I even have my mother reads when things are polished up and, tells me stuff, and then we'll find typos, which is always nice. Another set of eyes on it. But I guess a writers group in general, I think is very important. Writing is such a solitary endeavor. It's you and your keyboard and your characters and the words, and it can be very kind of isolating. And you need people who are going through the same things you are. You need for any number of reasons. One, I mean, you can learn so much in a group like that. I have learned so much since I joined. I joined back in 2011, and I have learned a ton. Both from, workshops and presentations and just from talking to people. And hopefully I've passed on some of that knowledge myself. But it's also just great to know people who are going through the same things. you can share your joys, share your frustrations. I mean, it helps. I have a very dear friend who wrote her first novel recently, um, who's not in New Jersey, not part of New Jersey Romance Writers, but I was like, well, just call me. Like whenever, you need, just call. And, she finally kind of did. And she's like, I don't, this is just, I think it's horrible. I think it's like, I don't know. I'm like, oh, you've hit the point where you want to take the book out back and set it on fire. And she's like, yes. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I've been there, like we're all there. So you kind of need, I think, that support when things are going badly. And yeah, when things are going well too. It's nice to have people who really understand, who can kind of celebrate those joys with you.
Um, so you did mention a new writer friend, but what advice would you give a new writer that's just starting out?
Partly, I mean, partly what I would first say is you are going to get a lot of advice when you start writing. People are going to tell you, or if you say you want to start writing or you are, people are going to tell you all the things you absolutely have to do. You have to read these 5 craft books and you need to study them. You have to make a detailed outline. You have to, it's one thing after another. And my biggest advice is there is nothing you have to do except write. You don't have to outline, you don't have to write every day. You don't have to read all of these craft books and learn from them. You can do all of those things if they work for you, but everybody finds their own way of getting words on the page. And that's really what makes you a writer, is that you are writing, you are putting words on a page, you are putting stories together. So I think, knowing that is that's kind of the biggest thing I would ever tell people. Um, the one other thing I would kind of say is just whatever genre you're writing in, whether it's, fantasy romance or romantasy, or whether it's, some other genre of romance or, mystery or whatever, just read widely in that genre you're writing. That's for any number of reasons. One, you need to know what's out there. If you're going to publish a book, you need to know what else is being published. And two, you will learn so much about craft, about genre conventions, about just putting a story together, about what works and what doesn't, just by reading what other people have written. So I think those are kind of the two biggest things I would tell people who are kind of starting out.
Okay. So I try to end on a fun note. And so I always like scour the internet, your web page, social media for something to ask. And for you, I did notice that in your bio you said you have a travel bucket list. Um, so what is on it? And what are some of your favorite places that you've already visited?
Oh my gosh, my travel bucket list is so long. If only my budget could encompass my bucket list. But yeah, there are just so many places I want to see. Gosh, Scotland. I A friend and I were planning a trip, and Scotland was one of the places that was it's been on my list, but it was one of the places we were considering, and we didn't end up going. And now I am like, I really, really need to get there soon, because we were researching, and now I'm like, yeah, I really need to. But yeah, all sorts of things. Scotland, I've heard Iceland's beautiful. I want to see it. I want to see the pyramids in Egypt. I want to explore all the Christmas markets in, Germany and Switzerland. There's just, oh my gosh, so many places I want to go. It's crazy. Um, as for, yeah, places I've been, I mean, I'm lucky to have been some amazing places. Italy will always be my favorite, I think. I don't know, maybe some place will surpass it, but yeah, it will always be my favorite, I think. Because I mean, it's amazing. It's beautiful. The people are wonderful. The food is amazing. But it's also like the tie to kind of my background. My family's all Italian. So it's sort of like kind of going back and seeing kind of where we came from. So that was kind of, um, I think always, I've been a few times, I've seen a decent amount of the country, not all of it. I would love someday to kind of go and try to find the villages that my great grandparents came from and kind of just see see what's there, see what's left. But yeah, so but that's amazing. That is actually where my friend and I went last summer. We ended up going to Italy together, which was amazing. Yeah, we went to the north this time, which is places I hadn't really seen, so it was fantastic. Yeah.
Very nice. Uh, so I thank you so much for joining us today from the library. Um, it's been great chatting. And I wish you all the best of luck with your new book and the series. Um, and look forward to having this available for you to share. And again, best of luck with the second book as you're writing it.
Oh, thank you so much. It was, yeah, it was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.